Why school teaches obedience, not power, Machiavelli warned us. Imagine this: you're 6 years old, full of energy, imagination, and curiosity, but you ask too many questions. You want to know why the sky is blue, why your teacher says raise your hand to speak, and why sitting still for 8 hours is considered good behavior. But instead of being rewarded for your curiosity, you're told to stay on task, follow instructions, and stop asking so many questions. Slowly, without even realizing it, you begin to associate silence with success, obedience with intelligence, and compliance with virtue. This is not a glitch in the system, it is the system. The hidden purpose of traditional schooling is not to create thinkers, it's to create followers. Not to empower, but to domesticate. And if that sounds extreme, ask yourself, how many classes did you take on how to think critically about power? How many teachers encouraged you to challenge authority, question the rules, or reinvent the system? The school, as we know it, does not teach power. It teaches obedience. And the more you comply, the higher your grades. The more you defer, the more you're praised.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more topics you love.
But let's stop and reflect for a moment. What is obedience really? Is it a moral virtue or is it a form of learned helplessness? Machiavelli, the Renaissance political philosopher who wrote The Prince, warned us centuries ago, power is never given, it is taken. And yet, how many of us leave school ready to take power? We leave with diplomas, not with sovereignty. We're trained to wait for instructions, to look for the right answer, and to fear getting it wrong. We are, in a sense, spiritually declawed. Now, don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying teachers are evil or that education is pointless. Teachers are often heroes trapped in a system they didn't design. But the structure of school bells, desks, punishments, standardized tests is not built for liberation. It's built for predictability, and predictable people are easy to manage. They're easy to govern. They don't revolt. So here's the question I want to plant in your mind like a seed. If school is not designed to make you powerful, then what is its real function? And more importantly, who benefits from your obedience? Let's dig deeper. Power, in its truest form, is not about control over others, it's about control over yourself. It's the ability to shape your own destiny, to say no when everyone else says yes, to build a life on your own terms. But school rarely teaches self-mastery. It teaches rule-following. When you show initiative that doesn't fit the curriculum, you're corrected. When you think differently, you're labeled a disruption. From a young age, we internalize the belief that authority is always right, and that questioning authority is dangerous. This is not education. This is conditioning. Think about how school rewards behavior. You don't get an A for being bold, curious, or visionary. You get an A for coloring inside the lines literally and metaphorically. You get punished for talking back, even if what you're saying is true. You're told to memorize, not to synthesize, and to repeat, not to innovate. And by the time you graduate, you're so used to being told what to do that the idea of creating your own path feels terrifying. Now, let's bring in Machiavelli. He understood power better than almost anyone. In The Prince, he wrote that rulers must appear moral while doing what is necessary to maintain control. Sound familiar? That's the school system in a nutshell. It appears benevolent, but it grooms you to be manageable. It teaches you how to play the game, not how to change it. Ask yourself, when was the last time you made a choice purely because you believed it was right, not because it was what your parents, teachers, or society told you to do? How often do you act from your own inner compass? Or have you outsourced your will to the system that raised you? This is why so many people feel lost after graduation. They've been trained to follow orders for so long that they don't know how to lead their own lives. They wait for a job offer, a boss, a set of instructions. They fear failure more than they desire freedom. And this is not accidental, it's by design. We live in a world where the powerful want you pacified, not angry, not rebellious, pacified. They want you productive but not dangerous, smart but not wise, trained but not sovereign. And school is the perfect tool for this. It teaches you just enough to be useful, but not enough to be ungovernable. So here's the challenge. Can you unlearn obedience? Can you reclaim the wild, questioning spirit you had as a child? Can you become dangerous not in a violent way, but in a creative, independent, sovereign way? Because here's a truth no one tells you. The people who change the world are rarely the ones who followed the rules. They're the ones who challenged them. They're the ones who saw the invisible chains and chose to break them. So I'll leave you with this question. What have you accepted as normal that is in fact a form of control? And are you willing to risk discomfort in exchange for freedom? The architecture of mental prison, how systems manufacture consent. Let's begin by asking something uncomfortable. What if most of your beliefs aren't yours? What if the thoughts you think, the values you hold, and the goals you chase were installed in your mind like software downloaded through repetition, authority, and subtle reward structures? Now consider this. School is often the first operating system. It's where the architecture of mental prison begins quietly, efficiently, and under the illusion of neutrality. You see, the genius of control is not in forcing obedience through violence, but in making obedience feel like freedom. That's the real power of the system. It doesn't need to chain your body if it can chain your mind. It doesn't need to censor every thought if it can convince you which thoughts are safe to think. And school, more than any other institution, is where this subtle engineering begins. The desks, the bells, the grades, all of it conditions you to associate discipline with value, external validation with worth, and conformity with success. You're taught not just what to think, but how to think, and more dangerously, what not to think. Machiavelli understood this deeply. He warned that rulers must shape public perception if they wish to maintain power. But he also hinted at something more insidious, that people can be convinced to love their own servitude if it's wrapped in the right language. For the great majority of mankind are satisfied with appearances, as though they were realities, he wrote. Isn't that exactly what the modern system does? It gives you the appearance of choice. Choose your major, choose your career path, choose your extracurriculars, but all within a narrow sandbox. You're not choosing freedom, you're choosing between pre-approved options. And the illusion of freedom is often more effective than overt control. Let's go deeper. Ask yourself, why do schools rarely teach negotiation, emotional resilience, or how to navigate power dynamics? Why is there almost no education on money, influence, or persuasion except in vague, sanitized terms? Because true power threatens the structure. If students learned how to think like entrepreneurs, strategists, or revolutionaries, the system would collapse under its own contradictions. It would no longer be able to produce predictable workers, obedient voters, or compliant citizens. So instead, it manufactures consent not by suppressing rebellion, but by making rebellion unthinkable. This is what Noam Chomsky called the manufacture of consent. But you don't need to silence dissent if you can shape the narrative so thoroughly that dissent becomes invisible. In school is where that narrative conditioning begins. You're told what success looks like: get good grades, go to a good college, get a good job, buy a house, retire, die. But who decided that was the right path? Who benefits from you chasing that dream? And more importantly, what if that dream is a cage? If you've ever felt like something was off but couldn't explain it, this is why. Deep down, your soul knows it wasn't born to sit in rows, follow scripts, and pass tests. You were born to create, to explore, to lead. But the system is not built for wild souls. It's built to tame them. It's built to make you internalize the belief that your worth is tied to your productivity, your grades, your compliance. So you end up confusing discipline with surrender. You confuse being liked with being free. Let me ask you something uncomfortable again. How many of your dreams are actually yours? Or were they installed by the system? Did you want to be a doctor because you felt called to heal, or because it was the smart path? Did you go to college because you truly wanted to learn, or because you were afraid of what would happen if you didn't? These are the questions school never wants you to ask. Because once you start asking them, the entire illusion starts to crack. And that's the beginning of liberation. A real education doesn't begin in school. It begins when you start to question the system that schooled you. It begins when you stop seeking permission to think. When you realize that intelligence is not the same as obedience. That a high GPA doesn't mean you're wise, it often just means you're good at playing the game. But wisdom? Wisdom is dangerous. Wisdom asks forbidden questions. Wisdom breaks false boundaries. Wisdom doesn't just memorize history, it makes it. So here's the real challenge. Are you brave enough to think thoughts the system never taught you to think? Are you willing to be misunderstood, ridiculed, or even rejected for the sake of your own truth? Because power doesn't come from being accepted. It comes from becoming unignorable by being rooted in your own vision, your own voice, your own values. No one ever became free by following instructions. No one ever changed the world by raising their hand and waiting to be called on. The architecture of mental prison is only as strong as your belief in it. The moment you begin to question it, cracks appear. From those cracks, light enters. So I ask you now, are you ready to stop being a product of the system and start becoming the author of your life? The price of power, why freedom demands inner rebellion. Power is not granted to the obedient. It is seized by those who are willing to disturb the peace first within themselves, and then within the world. The system doesn't fear your intelligence, it fears your awakening. Because once you begin to see that obedience is not the same as morality, that conformity is not the same as peace, and that rules are often written by the insecure to manage the brave, you begin to taste something dangerous: freedom. But freedom, true freedom, comes with a cost. And that cost is inner rebellion. Inner rebellion is not about chaos or destruction. It's about reclaiming your authority over your own mind. It's about questioning the scripts you've been handed by school, by society, by family, and asking yourself, do these beliefs serve me? Or do they keep me small? Most people don't ask this because they fear the answer. It's easier to believe that the system is wise, that the path is safe, and that following the rules will lead to happiness. But look around. Is everyone who followed that path truly free? Are they fulfilled? Are they alive in the deepest sense of the word? Most are not. They are surviving, not thriving. They are clocking in and clocking out, chasing promotions, fearing layoffs, numbing themselves with distractions, and calling it a life. Many are deeply intelligent, but their intelligence has been shackled. Their creativity has been buried beneath layers of social expectations and self-doubt. And this is the great tragedy of obedience. It doesn't just kill rebellion in the world, it kills rebellion within. You stop questioning, you stop dreaming, you stop becoming. And that's why inner rebellion is so important. Because before you can change your outer world, you have to confront the inner one. You have to dismantle the false structures inside your mind, those invisible beliefs about what you're allowed to be, what you're allowed to be, what you're allowed to want, and what you're allowed to say. You have to face the internalized voices that whisper, "Who are you to dream that big?" Or "That's not realistic." You must meet them with fire and say, "Who am I not to?" This is not easy. The mind resists change, especially when it's been trained to equate safety with sameness. But evolution is not safe. Transformation is not comfortable, but it requires friction. It requires doubt. It requires moments when you feel completely lost, because those are the moments when the old self begins to die and the new self begins to emerge. The system doesn't prepare you for this. It prepares you to maintain stability, not to pursue evolution. But power, the kind that changes lives, the kind that changes nations, only comes to those who are willing to risk the death of who they were in order to become who they must be. Ask yourself, what have you refused to question because it would make your life too uncertain? What truths have you buried under politeness and practicality? What parts of yourself did you silence just to fit in? These are your chains, and inner rebellion is the key. Machiavelli once said, "It is better to be feared than loved if you cannot be both." But perhaps the deeper truth is this: it is better to be free than to be accepted if you cannot be both. Because acceptance that costs you your soul is not acceptance, it is quiet rejection of your true self. And how many of us are living lives that are, at their core, a rejection of who we really are? You must rebel not just against the system, but against the part of you that seeks approval from it. You must learn to be whole without needing permission. You must learn to disappoint others in order to remain loyal to yourself. And you must be prepared to walk alone for a time, because the path to power is not crowded. But on that path, something extraordinary happens. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You begin to create instead of conform. You begin to act from vision, not fear. And that is when you become truly powerful, not because you have control over others, but because you are no longer controlled by them. So I ask you, what part of yourself have you abandoned in order to be accepted? And are you willing to reclaim it, even if it costs you everything that once felt safe? Sovereignty over self, the final test of true education. There comes a moment, if you're lucky or brave enough, when you realize that the real test was never the ones you took in school. It wasn't the exams, the grades, the rankings. The real test is whether, after years of conditioning, you have the courage to take back your mind. That is the final exam of life. Can you become sovereign over yourself? Can you unlearn obedience and remember who you are without the system telling you? True education, in its highest form, is not about acquiring knowledge. It's about awakening. It's about stripping away the lies you were taught and uncovering the raw, untamed truth at the core of your being. It's about seeing the difference between information and wisdom, between discipline and submission, between recognition and self-respect. And this kind of education doesn't happen in classrooms. It happens in the wilderness of your own soul, when you stop parroting what you were taught and start listening to what you know. But that's hard, because self-sovereignty demands that you take full responsibility for your life. You can no longer blame the teacher, the system, or society. You can no longer say, "They didn't let me." You have to say, "I didn't choose to." And that level of ownership is terrifying. It strips away your excuses. It forces you to confront the fact that you may have lived for years in a cage with the door wide open. Machiavelli warned that most people prefer security over freedom, that they would rather be governed than risk governing themselves. But those who choose freedom, real freedom, become unpredictable. They become powerful. Because when you own your thoughts, your time, your values, and your direction, you become impossible to control. You no longer need validation from the outside. You no longer fear standing alone. You no longer flinch when the system tries to shame you back into line. And that, right there, is the moment you graduate not from school, but from subjugation. Think about it. What if your diploma was never the symbol of your liberation, but your receipt for compliance? What if the real badge of honor in life is not the degree hanging on your wall, but the fire you carry in your chest, the relentless commitment to live your truth, that no matter who misunderstands it? You don't need to destroy the system. You need to outgrow it. You need to rise so far above it that it can no longer define you. That's what real rebellion looks like, not screaming in protest, but quietly, fiercely becoming so free that your very existence is a challenge to the status quo. But this path isn't for everyone. It's lonely. It's uncertain. It's full of false starts and painful awakenings. It demands discipline, not the kind school teaches, but the kind you forge in the fire of your own will. It demands vision, not the kind handed to you by a career counselor, but the kind that bubbles up from your own soul when you finally sit still and listen. So here is the final question, the one that will either haunt you or liberate you. Are you living a life you chose or one that was chosen for you? Because if you didn't choose it, you're not really living. You're just performing, and life is too short, too sacred, and too wild to be a performance. Machiavelli warned us, but we weren't listening. He told us that power is never given, it is taken. But we've been trained to wait, to ask, to hope. Now, the wait is over. Take it. Your mind, your time, your voice, your life. Take it back. Because that is the one lesson school will never teach you. But it's the only one that truly matters.